So this video is going to look at President Theodore Roosevelt. And the aim for today is what can we learn from the life of Theodore Roosevelt? What is today's aim? So, Theodore Roosevelt, who grew up to be president, was born in New York City. And he was born into a really wealthy, well-off family. They owned the whole house you see in the picture here. But as a kid, they didn't expect him to live. He had asthma, and back in the day, if you had asthma like that, they just expected you to die. They didn't have inhalers, they had none of that stuff. So his parents got told, listen, your kid, he's not going to live. And if he does live, he's going to have a really boring life. He's going to have to stay indoors, avoid anything that might make him have an asthma attack. And Roosevelt's dad was like, I don't want that to be my son's life. So in the attic in the top of their house, he had enough money to build pretty much a whole gym. And he made young Theodore stay there and work out constantly, constantly until he could build his body up so it was strong enough that he was able to have a regular life even with the asthma at this time. Now, while he was doing this, Roosevelt also worked on a lot of different things. He became really interested in nature and history. He spent a lot of time studying. What was Theodore Roosevelt's life like as a child? Now, eventually, Roosevelt goes to college. And in college, he meets a woman named Alice Hathaway Lee while he's there at Harvard. They come back, they get married, they move out of New York City to Long Island, and they start to plan to build a life together. Right after they have their first child, a daughter, also named Alice after her mother, Alice Hathaway, now Roosevelt, gets sick. And on Thursday 14th, so on Valentine's Day in 1884, she dies. Now, I'm going to have to get back to you on this because I don't remember if it's exactly correct, so I'll put a note in the video if I'm wrong. But the way I always remembered hearing it is on that same day, Roosevelt's mother also died. And in his journal, he just put a giant X and wrote, "The light has gone out of my life." So how do you think he felt on this day, on February 14th, 1884, on that Valentine's Day? Now, the way he dealt with all of this was he just said, forget it all. I'm moving out west. He left New York City. He moved out west to the middle of America. He started working as a cowboy. Now, he was rich, so when he decided he wanted to become a cowboy, he didn't find a job. He bought an entire ranch and started running it himself. But he was well respected and well known out there. He got a reputation for being tough, for taking care of his own business. He also worked as a lawman for a while, so like as a sheriff. So he went around and arrested criminals, and he got a reputation for being tough but fair with the men he arrested. There we go. Sorry, that slide's in the wrong place. Now, eventually, he came back to New York City. And in New York City, he got a job as the police commissioner. So he's in charge of all the cops in New York City. And at that time, the cops in New York City were corrupt. That means they didn't really do their job. They were lazy. If they were supposed to be out walking around preventing crime, instead they'd go in a bar and get a drink. Or they'd go to sleep. or they'd take bribes, or they just wouldn't show up to work and would say they did when their supervisor asked them. When Roosevelt took over as commissioner, he wasn't going to take any more of that. He wasn't going to stand for any more of that. He would go out and walk the streets at night alone. And if he saw a cop taking a bribe, hanging out drinking in a bar, asleep at their post, he would go up, yell at the officer, then go back to the office and fire them the next morning. The cops didn't like it, but they started to do their job, and people started to notice that this young rich kid Roosevelt, there might be a little more to him than just his daddy's money. So, how did Theodore Roosevelt start to get people's attention in New York City? Now, Roosevelt goes on to gain more and more power. And he moves up from just being a big shot in New York City to working in Washington, D.C. as the Assistant Secretary of the Navy. So that means he's now running one of the biggest parts of the US government. He's running the Navy. So he's helping to be in charge of all the ships, all the boats that the US has ready for war. And he was an imperialist and a nationalist. So, an imperialist means he wanted to take over other people's land, and a nationalist means he thought his country was the best. He also did not think the American president was strong enough to be the American president. He called President McKinley, his boss, a man who has the backbone of a chocolate eclair. That's like, those cream filled donuts? That's what he was calling the president. He was calling him a donut. And eventually, he gets bored of working for that president and decides he wants to have a war. So he starts pushing again and again and again for the US to go to war with Spain over Cuba. And we're going to stop it right here for today. And tomorrow we're going to take a look at the Spanish American War and see how this war that he wants, because he's bored, gets started.